Hi everyone and welcome back to the Chemist Couple podcast with your host Lee and Jess. Now we are two pharmacists who work in GP practices within the northwest of England, and the point of our podcast is to review the evidence that is out there, share our personal experiences and hopefully provide you with practical advice that can enhance your health. And this podcast is aimed at those who are conscious about their health but are looking for more clarification on the routes to enhance their lifestyle at the moment. And as always, all of our podcasts are our opinion and are informational only, so it should not be used in substitutes to seeing a healthcare professional. Right, now the big introduction's over. We are doing a series on alcohol. So we have planned 4 episodes. The aim of these is not to give a biased opinion, but to provide you with the information, the science that's up to date, and just allow you to, if you are a drinker or you do want to continue drinking, whether it's safe for you and whether it should be a part of your lifestyle going forward. And we are aware that it is a sensitive subject, so we are, like I said, it's not biased. We are just providing you with information going forward. And going with the unbiased approach, I think it's good that we declare our interests in terms of what we do in terms of drinking. So my interests, I stopped drinking last year. I used to drink socially before that. I wasn't classed as a big drinker, so I have seen both sides of the story. And what are your interests?
So I still drink. I drink socially, like you've just said. So I don't drink every single week. And I think over the last year, I've probably cut down on the amount of alcohol that I am consuming. But probably still drinking too much, to be honest. But we will obviously discuss that.
We'll get onto that because I think a lot more people than you drink more than what you think. But I think, well, this episode is about the general background, social implications, if I can speak, the physiology of alcohol, and then we will go into the future episodes where it's complications, are there any uses and benefits, beneficial aspects of alcohol, and then its interference with medication. So where do we start? I'm going to start with you in terms of when's the first reference that there is to alcohol?
Yeah, so I think that's a good place to start is what is the history of alcohol? So it's probably believed, well, it is believed that our primary ancestors were drinking alcohol 100, 200,000 years ago, so a long time ago. And the reason that we know that they were drinking alcohol or consuming alcohol was because alcohol is produced by a natural process called fermentation. So fermentation is the breakdown of glucose and fructose in a warm environment by yeast into ethanol and carbon dioxide. So like I say, natural process, and it happens within fruits, within honey, within grains. So it's believed that our primate ancestors were eating the fruits that had fermented. They probably felt a similar buzz to what we feel now when we have alcohol. But the important point there is that because our ancestors were consuming alcohol that long ago, we've developed mechanisms to be able to break down alcohol. I said to you earlier on that if you think about it in terms of something like arsenic, which is also a drug, only a very minute amount of arsenic is enough to kill a human being, whereas we know that humans can consume a large amount of alcohol. And it could be to do with the fact that, like I say, we've developed and the mechanisms have occurred over a long period of time in order to be able to better handle alcohol.
Yeah, because that applies with lactase as well, with the use of cows and farming industries within, I think it was Scandinavia, and we developed a lactase enzyme. So yeah, same principles apply.
Yeah. So that's a bit about, the first sort of consumption of alcohol, but the first recorded known consumption of humans drinking alcohol and drinking it as a beverage was about 9,000 years ago. So that is a long time ago. Now, that is the first recorded evidence. We could have been consuming alcohol way before that, but that is the Neolithic period. So it's so many years ago if you think about it. And there was evidence from pottery found in what we now know as China. And it was a fermented beverage which was made from rice, honey and fruit, they thought. Now, back in those days, we don't know what they were using it for, whether it was for social, whether it was to experience this, buzz or, out-of-body experience. Some people may define it as, whether it was used for spiritual reasons, religious reasons, cultural reasons, we just don't know. However, what we do know is that we use it for all of those things still today, so it probably or could have been used for everything mentioned above. So yeah, that was the first recorded. Then obviously through history, like I say, we've used it for all of those things. If you think about religion, for instance, even still today, we use red wine to symbolise the blood of Christ in Christianity. You look back at the Bible with, Jesus turning water into wine. So it's been throughout history for long periods of time, and being used as in positive ways mainly. I read a quote that did say that wine was the gift of God and drunkenness was the gift of the devil. So drinking alcohol in moderation is seen as a really good thing, but if you drink too much, it's not a good thing. So it's getting that balance, and often we it's very hard to do that, but
we haven't mastered it over 9,000 years.
No, we haven't.
So I don't think it's going to finish anytime soon. But how has alcohol consumption changed and evolved over that period of time?
Yeah, so like we say, we don't know what they were using it for initially, but we do know that it was used for medicinal purposes over the history of time.
Okay.
So it was used for anaesthesia, which we do know, and we still use it today, which we will go on to in the medication podcast, before overdose of different types of alcohol, so mainly antifreeze. I also know that it was prescribed by pharmacists, so there's pharmacopoeias from 2,000 years before Christ actually, which is really interesting, and they were prescribing alcohol, and it was deemed to be good for pain, which obviously it does numb the sense of pain, and then it was also recommended for things like upset stomachs, and probably it in moderation, but it was used as a medicinal product.
When you said about prescribing it, when we were doing our degree, there was something about being able to prescribe Guinness and it being funded via the prescriptions that we can write. And there's a loophole within something called the drug tariff, which is basically how we fund and work out the remuneration on prescriptions. But
it's mad, isn't it?
I don't know whether that still applies.
I don't know. I always know that my mum, we used to work in Aintree Hospital, which is a hospital in Liverpool, and she seems to think, well, it must be true, but that they used to keep whiskey within the dispensary, and you could actually prescribe a dram of whiskey to any patient who'd come in and they were having it at home, so mainly elderly, just like as a nightcap. Obviously we don't do that these days, but it just shows that we do use alcohol for medicinal purposes, even though we know what the poor consequences of long-term alcohol use are. But
I was going to ask you about the strengths.
Yeah.
So how has strength of alcohol changed? Has it always been what we know today in terms of spirits, where the 40% beers, where the 4% on average? Has it always been like that?
It hasn't. So when I was talking about the fermentation process, that being a natural process, if you think about it, yeast are living organisms. So when they're producing this alcohol, it then is also toxic to the yeast. So when the alcohol percentage was getting too high, it would obviously kill off the yeast, and so then the fermentation process couldn't carry on. So years ago, before distillation, which I'll go on to, the maximum alcohol by volume was about 13%, and that was the absolute maximum. We believe that beers back in the day were probably around 1%. So nowadays it's about 3 to 5, so it was a lot less. Also during those times, you have to think about alcohol, that sometimes it was actually safer to drink alcohol than it was to drink water, just purely because of sanitation and things like that. So it was common to drink alcohol morning, noon and night. However, because of the strength of alcohol, we don't know whether the same side effects were occurring because of the low dose or the low concentration. But then the process of distillation was invented. I actually don't know when that was, but it was still a long time ago that it occurred, and that was when we figured out that we could heat up the alcohol water combination. Alcohol burns or evaporates at a lower temperature. So then once that evaporates, you basically capture it within a container, let it cool, and then you've got pure alcohol, and that's when spirits were then being able to be formed. So like vodka, rum, sake, things like that. And we know that, if you think even nowadays, Jamaica is known for its rum, Scotland is known for its whiskey, Japan is known for its sake. So everybody across the globe has an experience with alcohol, and it was a huge trade commodity. So when in the times of exploration, it would be put onto ships and it would be taken to different continents and exchanged for other goods. There was obviously a lot of high taxes on alcohol as well, so it did fund a lot of wars. When in battles and things like that. You think back to like King Henry VIII time, it was a social thing and it was a social status. And when you think about all the feasts that they were having, they could import really expensive wines from the Mediterranean, and it was a social. They were people were.
Well, it's still the same today, and we will touch upon that later on in this episode, but yeah, social impact and alcohol is a big thing.
Yeah. But I think, the point of going into the history of alcohol is just to highlight that it's been around for thousands of years, and that's why it's still around today, and why we always say if it was to be invented or be discovered today, it probably wouldn't be legal because of all the, the implications that it has. The reason for it still being legal is because, like we've just discussed, it's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah, and it's surprising how little we know as a public group on terms of the safety of alcohol, the uses of it, and etc. So that's why we wanted to go through this podcast.
Yeah, I think we discussed in the last podcast actually when we were talking about diabetes being a common condition, and so people don't give it the credit that it needs really. And I think it's the same with alcohol. It's so widely used and widely available that you probably don't think about it being as harmful as what it is. So.
Okay, so as we found out, alcohol does have an extensive history, and in more of a modern day practical sense, we discuss alcohol in terms of units.
Yeah.
Now, units is a measure of the alcohol content, so pure ethanol. So that equates to about 8 grams or 10 mils of pure ethanol is 1 unit. So in terms of what does that look like in a drink, 1 unit is a shot of vodka.
Yep.
Now, when I say a shot, it's a standard measure within the UK, which is 25 mil. That's a law.
Yeah.
And then it's half a pint, give or take, of 4% beer. And we basically have been using this for guidelines, haven't we, for a while. And these changed in 2016 to maybe a lot of men's this taste, because the previous units, do you know what they used to be?
Yeah, so it used to be 21 units for men and 14 units for women. And like Lee said, it changed in 2016 to 14 units for both men and women. Why was that?
So you would think from a physiological point of view, men tend to be bigger, so you could absorb more alcohol, etc. But the guidelines from the chief medical officer basically said that the acute harms for men in terms of injury or accidents were higher than women, but then the overall long-term effects from alcohol are higher than women. So the average it out to be 14 units.
Yeah.
And it's called low-risk drinking, the guidelines. So it's not called safe level because they haven't determined the safe level of consumption for alcohol, as you will find out in the future episodes. But it's called low-risk drinking. And the idea is that, again, this is my opinion, but it's to do with the economics. Alcohol is such a big trade. We fund a lot of nightclubs, and a lot of cities and tourism is based upon alcohol, especially within the Western world. So if you completely banished it, again, there would be a lot of ethical... We said the other day there might be riots. So it is this idea of balance. Can we advise on a safe level of drink, or a safer level of drinking? And that's where it come about.
I was going to ask, so obviously we recommend 14 units a week for men and women now. Can you have 14 units in one day, or does it have to be spread across the week?
It's got to be spread across the week, So 14 units, when I used to go to university, binge drinking is a big thing. And that is the most harmful form of drinking, and consuming the unit in one go, because it's obviously, as we'll get onto it, sort of overpowers the liver. But yeah, you should spread it across the week. And what does 14 units look like? Do you want to guess?
So is it about 6 pints of normal strength beer, so about 4% beer?
Yeah, it is.
To be honest, I didn't know that before I did this podcast, because I think it is quite confusing, and a lot of people don't know what units are, like say I didn't. So it's probably just worthwhile maybe going onto I think there's like Alcohol UK website, and it'll give you what does it actually look like, just so that people listening to it can picture it or like visualize it and have an idea of what does it look like, or what does it mean.
I mean, a lot of canned and bottled beers, for example, will include the units. Bottles of wine will. It's all dependent on the alcohol by volume, percentage and volume that you drink, but on average it's 6 pints of beer. But if you actually say that to an average drinker, that's not a lot. It's less than 1 pint a day. Which to some people, they would probably consume 6 pints after work in one sitting, and they'd do that over and over again. So yeah, I just thought it would be appropriate to bring it up and what that is in practical terms.
Yeah. So I think the next thing to go on to would then be to say, well, what happens when we actually drink alcohol? What is the mechanisms, like we were discussing with our primate ancestors? What happens in our body?
I'm going to say you'll have to bear with me on this one because there's so many things we need to go through. But once you first ingest alcohol, it goes to the stomach like anything else. Now, the stomach, for those who don't know, it's formed with tight junctions, so the cells are very tight between them. So it normally prevents a lot of absorption. A lot of medication that you do take will be absorbed within the intestine. So alcohol is one of the only drugs to actually be absorbed directly through your stomach. Now, that could lead to implications with feeding.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so is that why we then would have food before we eat and before we drink?
Yeah, you can have food before we eat. But yeah, before you drink, it's advised that you don't drink on an empty stomach. And the reason being is because the food will act as a barrier, as a buffer. It will send more alcohol into the intestine. It delays absorption, so it gives your liver more time to process it. And you'll know from when I go on to the liver in terms of how it's metabolized and how that extra time can prevent you from becoming drunker in a shorter amount of time, basically. So once it's also went into the stomach, the alcohol can also increase secretion, so it increases the acid level within your stomach. It also increases the level of amylases and secretory juices by your salivary glands. I couldn't get my words up then. I couldn't think of like a normal word. So that's why they used to advise to drink a sherry before tea, because it gets all the juices going. It
ready
aids
for digestion.
Exactly, yeah. So that's the reason.
Yeah.
But
and then also just saying about that in terms of it produces more acid is why we don't recommend patients who suffer with heartburn, which is like overproduction of stomach acid, to drink alcohol, because it just exacerbates it.
Exactly. So once we've been absorbed, it goes into the portal vein, which goes to the liver. Now, once it goes into the liver, there's a thing called first pass metabolism, which means anything that comes into your gut goes through your liver first, and it acts as a sieve to try and remove any toxins or medication. It will remove as much as it can. Whatever is left, it will go into general circulation and have its effects. Now, I will come back to metabolism in a bit. We'll just go into the general effects. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the main effect of alcohol? What is the first thing that comes to mind?
Inebriation.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you actually tell people that alcohol is a depressant in terms of how it works, people can't get their heads around it, basically, because when you see a lot of people who drink, or you've been around people in the acute phase, so the first hour or two of a party, people seem more excited, the volume goes up within the room, all these inhibitions are removed, and that's not because it's stimulating it, it's because it removes the inhibition basically within your brain. So you're not thinking straight in that sense, so that's why it seems to heighten your activity. But in reality, it's working on a subtype of receptors mainly. There's actually a lot more complexity to this, but there's a subtype of receptors within the brain called GABA, and they are involved in basically the inhibitory actions within the brain. So, what do you want to say?
No, I was going to say some things like sleepiness,
drowsiness,
drowsy,
So the way this works is alcohol is quite weird in terms of it doesn't act on all the GABA receptors. It works on a subdivision and a subdivision of that subdivision. So this is why we stopped using it really in medicine, is because it's unpredictable where it can work. Now, other people have heard of medications probably called benzodiazepines, so you'll get diazepam. It works in a very similar way to alcohol, but it's more predictable. So it binds this receptor, and this receptor enables chloride ions to come in. The significance being is that it reduces excitability of that neuron, so it depresses the activity, leading to all the effects we know.
It's all coming back to me now from uni.
But you'll be lucky because it does remove your memory, as you know.
Yeah.
So that is the main effect of alcohol. It depresses your nervous system in some way, but it's not predictable. There are other effects in terms of, you'll know of a term called breaking the seal.
Yeah.
Which is basically when you first have a few drinks, you're okay, and then you'll get to a point where you need to go to the toilet. And then you keep going to the toilet for a prolonged period of time, and then it will stop. Do you want to know why that is?
Yes, I would like to know. Is it to do with ADH?
Yeah, ADH, you know it. So antidiuretic hormone is a hormone that works within your kidney. It reabsorbs the water, so it prevents you from producing too much urine and becoming dehydrated. So if you inhibit that, basically that hormone, you'll increase the amount of urine production. It does work until an effect, and then it sort of tails off.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons as well why you'll probably hear people say, oh, have a glass of water before you go to bed, and because alcohol is also it dehydrates you because of that mechanism.
Yeah.
So it's important to rehydrate, and you'll get the next day the hangover symptoms, which we'll go through, but one of them will be headache, which can be to do with the alcohol, but also to do with the fact that it's also dehydrated you.
And luckily you brought that up, because another reason why that happens is alcohol is a essential vasodilator. So you'll actually feel warm when you drink, but actually it's increasing heat loss.
Yeah.
And then the idea is it's vasodilating, and then when you stop drinking, it vasoconstricts, which can also lead to headaches. But the headache probably more likely due to dehydration as well. So once you've had them central effects, I wanted to talk about how do we get rid of them effects in terms of how is it metabolized. So let's go back to the liver. So alcohol comes into your body, into the liver. It is metabolized by an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, and it forms this chemical called acetaldehyde, if I can get my words up today. That is the one chemical that leads to the effects such as the hangover, which is flushing, you've got nausea and vomiting, all the unnecessary and nasty effects of alcohol.
It's highly toxic, isn't it, to our body? Yeah.
Alcohol itself is a direct irritant to the stomach and all them things, which we will go on to in other episodes, but yeah. Now, to get rid of this, aldehyde dehydrogenase converts that into another form of a chemical called acetic acid. So then that removes all alcohol from the body.
Yeah.
In that. Now, there's one thing in terms of metabolism, is that 90% of alcohol is metabolized and 10% is left unchanged. I'm going to put you on the spot here because I haven't told you about this question. In which ways do we excrete the unchanged amount?
I was just about to say that. So is it through the biliary tract? So it'll be excreted in feces? Oh no, it's not actually. I know what it is. It's in our breath, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So it's like
your breath and urine.
Sorry, I didn't. Oh yeah.
So that forms the basis of the on-side or whatever road testing for drink driving.
Sorry, yeah.
And that's why you go, because 10%, and then you can basically work back the concentration and correlate it with how much you've drank. So yeah, 10% is unchanged, metabolized, and then you've got 90% that is removed from the body. Now, in terms of the metabolism, it does something that's very special in comparison to other drugs, and it's called, the fancy word is zero order kinetics. And another term for it is saturated kinetics. What that means is that when you have a normal drug, so for example, paracetamol, when you increase the dose, your body will increase the rate of clearance. Yeah. Give or take, you've got the mechanisms there. Yeah. Whereas alcohol gets saturated at very low levels. So that's why you notice that.
So sorry, just before we go on, when you say it gets saturated at very low levels, is it the acetaldehyde that gets saturated, and so there's only a certain amount of those enzymes? So what I mean is that the alcohol dehydrogenase. Yeah. So that conversion of alcohol to acetaldehyde is saturated. Yeah. The reason why it gets saturated is because it uses something called a cofactor, which is NAD+. And you are aware of what the other uses of NAD+. Yeah. It's used in multiple metabolic functions. Now, the amount of NAD+ that we've got available is limited. I think it's about 1.5 kilos at the top of my head. And that limits the rate of elimination of alcohol to 8 grams, which is a unit per hour. Yeah. So that's why you hear a lot of people using that reference. That's where it comes from. So like you just said with NAD, obviously I know that it's involved in a lot of different pathways within the body. So does that mean that because we're using it for alcohol, it shuts off all of the different pathways, and then just focuses on trying to clear this alcohol from your body? In effect, it will. It will prioritise the alcohol. So in terms of other metabolic reactions with energy production, fat oxidation, fat synthesis, and all them are affected by the use of alcohol. That's why you can lead to fatty liver disease, because it will cause a shift in the reactions down there. Yeah. But that is a big thing, is in terms of this zero order kinetics. Once you continue to consume alcohol, it will go up at an alarming rate. Yeah. So it will go up steady, and then it'll just surpass because it won't be able to be cleared by the liver, so it just goes into general circulation. Yeah. So you will notice a lot of people will just fall off a cliff, basically. Yeah. They'll just go really drunk. Yeah. I think that's the majority of it. Yeah. It's quite hard to go through full circle of what happens and all them things. I think you did really well, to be honest. It was very... We'll see whether anyone finds that helpful anyway. I think it was helpful. So I think the next thing to go into then is just our personal experiences with alcohol. As with all our podcasts, we like to just give our own input into what our experience is with with different conditions. And like we said at the beginning, we have very different experiences at the moment.
We do. And we're going to touch on all the social implications now, aren't we?
Yeah.
In terms of why do people still drink, why do people not drink, and all them things. And I think the biggest factor for socially drinking is, well, especially within the Western world, it's this fear of lack of inclusion.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. And if you go somewhere, you're adding another barrier. So if you go somewhere, so for me, example, I'll go to somewhere, especially within the first few months of not drinking, it's another barrier for someone to ask about.
Yeah.
And you do single yourself out in some ways. What do you think about that?
I agree. I also think that, like I said earlier, it's ingrained in everything within our society. So it's at births, it's at funerals, it's at marriages, it's at church. It's at celebrations, it's at commiserations. So in every single walk of life, alcohol plays its part. It's also advertised everywhere, so it's glamorized.
That's the big thing, it's glamorized. Yeah, all the fancy restaurants and bars that serve alcohol, they look unbelievable.
They look good. So many reasons as to why we do drink so much still, even though we know what the consequences of it are. But no, I do agree that it is very difficult. I know that from when you stopped drinking alcohol, you did get a lot of people saying, oh, you're boring, and it's just this mindset that we've got. And I guess it's, I grew up surrounded by alcohol. Like I say, it was always at events. So like if I was at Christmas time, we used to have like a family party, and all my, obviously I was younger then, but all like my parents and my grandparents were like having a drink, and so it was just normal, like growing up within that environment. And it was never sort of said, obviously people say, oh, when you grow up don't drink, but it was sort of a joke, and it was never, no, seriously, like don't I. The only person I know in my family who doesn't drink is my nan, and that's purely just because of health issues. So it's not the norm to not drink, especially
given the culture that we've come from.
Yeah.
But like you said, a lot of events do have alcoholic ties. I go and watch the footy. That's got a massive tie to alcohol and betting.
Yeah.
A lot of things that if you don't do it already, you're outside the top. Well, you are basically part of the 1% who aren't doing it.
Yeah.
So it is harder than what people make out to be. It's about being within the right groups. And then I think when you do stop drinking, you do find out who you've got a common connection with.
Yeah.
I think that is a big thing. That's one thing I have found, is you find a similar ground to certain people, and you find that some people were only in your life because you basically socialised over alcohol.
Yeah.
That's a very doom and gloom outlook on it. I don't mean it to be that way. But
it is true. It is true. And I think I was saying before we did the podcast, we just had a little chat about it, and going back to when people were saying, oh, you're boring, and why aren't you drinking, and go on, have a drink. I'm guilty of it, every now and again I'll say, oh, just have a glass of wine, it's fine. And doing this podcast, I feel really bad about it now, because I'm encouraging it when you've clearly chosen that you don't want to drink. And it's not coming from a bad place, but also sometimes it might be, well, actually does that person feel guilty for drinking? And maybe it's, it's their way of being, making themselves feel better, to be like, oh, I don't know, but it could possibly be something to do with that.
But we did discuss how abruptly I did stop drinking.
Yeah.
And I do want to make it clear that I wasn't a big drinker, it was socially, but like we said, it's a big part of our culture where we're from. All the activities we do are centered around alcohol. So when I did stop, it was a big thing for you, because when we started first going out,
we met.
It was all based around alcohol, wasn't it?
And
not because I was drunk and a fan.
No, but when we first met,
all the social events.
Yeah, exactly. We would see each other at social events, and we would, back here we'd have, make dinner together, and we'd have a glass of wine and things like that. Like you say, it was, and so it is a big thing. But I fully support that you don't drink now, and I think it's admirable, to be honest. And I feel like it's obviously it's changed my perception of alcohol as well, which has been good for me. I've definitely cut down since you've stopped drinking, and it's improved my health overall. Like, I have seen the benefits of just cutting down. you know, so the benefits of completely stopping, it's, you know,
Yeah,
crazy.
and the reason why I did stop, for anyone who wants to know, is from a health point of view. I obviously went to the gym a lot and I still do, but it was the only thing that would knock me off my training for that week.
Yeah.
So I'd go all out for 1 week, and then for a couple of days you're not on it. And then there was a few health scares. Well, it wasn't health scares, there actually was health incidents within my family. And I thought, what is one of the only factors that I can still control that's still impacting my health negatively?
Yeah.
And I thought alcohol is the only thing really, so that's why I stopped it. But yeah, it was all about productivity mainly.
Yeah.
We work 5-6 days a week, and then we were getting up on a weekend and I was still working. So I thought, well, I might as well be fresh and do that. And I can sit, and at the very beginning I said this is an unbiased podcast series, and it is because I can see why people drink.
Yeah.
I just want people to have the information there that I've looked into and I've got to my disposal.
Of course.
And there is no, I just want to make it clear before we go on to the other series as well, is that there is no evidence of having 1 or 2 drinks every few months is detrimental to your health. We're talking about chronic in terms of, acute and chronic in terms of binge drinking or consistently drinking, even if it's low amounts. What does that entail in terms of benefits?
Yeah.
But it was interesting researching it.
Yeah.
I think it's, for anyone out there, this was just a basis of what happens to alcohol, why does it come about, what does a unit mean, all practical advice really. And the ones coming up are, I think, going to be a useful insight into whether you should consume it or not.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast if you got to the end. And as always, if you have any questions about the podcast that we've discussed, if you have any other topics that you would like us to discuss in the future, then please just message us on our social media. Also, to just reiterate that everything that we have discussed within this podcast is for informational purposes only, and it shouldn't be used in substitute from seeing your medical professional. Next week, like Lee discussed, we are going to be talking about the acute and chronic complications of alcohol. So thanks for listening.